Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining me here on the Royal House of Ra. I am your host, Amenhotep Khufu El Ra. Today's show is episode 19, part 2, Dynasty XVIII. So this is the second part of discussing about Dynasty XVIII. Remember, this is the New Kingdom period, and this is the age of empire and expansion and other developments that happened in Kemet during this time. Now, as I mentioned, we will be discussing the last seven pharaohs of the 18th dynasty, and those pharaohs are Tutmosis the Fourth, Amenhotep III, Amenhotep IV, also known as Akhenaten, Smenkhkare, Tutankhamun, and Horemheb. So those are the seven pharaohs that we will be discussing today on today's show. Once again, I'd like to give a thank you for those who support the show, who had subscribed, liked, and also shared the content as well. Please continue to do so because this helps out the show. Also, on Thursday, March 17th, we are going to do episode 20. Episode 20, we will be discussing Dynasty 19. And that would be at, as I mentioned, March 17th, this Thursday, live at 2 p.m. Central Time, 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 1 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, and 12 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So that's what we're going to be discussing on Thursday. So let's get into the show today so we can now before we get into this, now Tutmosis the Fourth, there was a doubt to his legitimacy to rule as pharaoh in Kemet. And so this was like a little scandal here that was going on back then. But we're going to get into that and see what exactly happened with that. And also we're going to talk about Amenhotep III, his royal wives and early years in his reign on the throne. A lot of achievement was done under his reign. And then we're going to go into Akhenaten, who is also known as Amenhotep IV, who was another scandalous pharaoh, the one who created the monolithic religion, the first civilization who created a religion based on one God. So we're going to get into that. So let's get into the show now. Excuse me. Tutmosis the Fourth. There may have been some doubt about the legitimacy of Tutmosis IV's succession, since a long inscription preserved on a tall still between the paws of the Sphinx at Giza smacks of propaganda in support of the new king. Known as the Dream Still, it tells how the young prince Tutmosis was out hunting in the desert when he fell asleep in the shadow of the Sphinx. Re-ha-re-kar-ti, the sun god embodied in the Sphinx, appeared to him in a dream and promised that if the sand engulfing the great limestone body was cleared away, the prince would become king. Needless to say, the sand clearing operation was immediately carried out, and the prince became the fourth king of his name. Little of a military nature appears to have occurred during Tutmosis the Fourth reign, although our knowledge may be marred by the lack of texts. A Nubian campaign is recorded in year 8, which was of course highly successful. There also appear to have been some Syrian campaigns, since the king is referred to twice as conqueror of Syria, but these may have been rather low-key policing excursions rather than full-blown military attacks. It is from the reign of Tutmosis the Fourth, that some of the best known decorated private tombs survived in the Theban necropolis, such as those of Nunk and Minna. Tutmosis' own anciently robbed tomb in the Valley of the Kings was found in 1903 by Howard Carter. A large amount of the damaged and destroyed funerary furniture, ushabtis, food, provisions, and a chariot were found in it. The destruction appears to have taken place before year 8 of Horemheb 1321 to 1293 BC, when two graffiti recorded the restoration of the tomb by the official Maya and his assistant. I'm going to try to pronounce this name. Thutmose. The king's mummy, however, was not present in the splendidly decorated granite sarcophagus. It had been found 5 years earlier as one of those hidden in the tomb of Amenhotep II. So there was a little scandal there with Tutmosis the Fourth. He did have some successful military campaigns in Nubia and in Syria, but they were more of what you would say more of excursions than instead of a full-blown military campaign. Okay, let's get into Amenhotep III. Amenhotep III, long reign of almost 40 years, was one of the most prosperous and stable in Akenaten history. His great-grandfather, Tuthmosis III, had laid the foundation of the Akenaten Empire by his campaigns into Syria, Nubia, and Libya. Hardly any military activity was called for under Amenhotep, and such little as there was in Nubia was directed by his son and viceroy of Kush, Mermos. Amenhotep III was the son of Tutmosis IV by one of his chief wives, Queen Mutemwaye. It is possible, though now doubted by some, that she was the daughter of the Mitannian king Artatama, sent to the Akenaten court as part of a diplomatic arrangement to cement the alliance between the strong militarist state of Mitanni in Syria and Kemet. The king's royal birth is depicted in a series of reliefs in a room on the east side of the temple of Luxor, which Amenhotep built for Amun, the creator god. The ram-headed Khanum of Elphanite is seen fashioning the young king as his Ka on a potter's wheel watched by the goddess Isis. The god Amun is then led to his meeting with the queen by Apis-headed Thor, god of wisdom. Subsequently, Amun is shown standing in the presence of the goddess Hether and Mut, and nursing the child created by Khnum. The royal wives. Amenhotep III had a large and ever-increasing number of ladies in his harem. Several of them were foreign princesses, the result of diplomatic marriages, but his chief wife was a woman of non-royal rank whom he had married before he came to the throne. This was Te, the daughter of a noble called Yuya, and his wife Tuya. The family was an important one. Not only did it hold land in the delta, but Yuya was a powerful military leader. Te's brother Othnan was also to rise to high office under Amenhotep III as Chancellor of the King of Lower Kemet, second prophet of Amun, semi-priest of Hippopolis, and divine father. The uncorroborated and almost undisturbed tomb of Eula and Tula was discovered in a small side wadi of the Valley of the Kings by Theodore Davis in 1905. Their two mummies are amongst the best preserved in the Cairo Museum. Te gave birth to 6 or more children, at least 2 sons and then 4 daughters. The oldest boy died without reigning, leaving his younger brother, the future Amenhotep IV, later called Akhenaten, heir to the throne. Amenhotep III also married 2 of his daughters, first Isis and then in year 30 Setamun. Evidence for this comes from a series of coal eyeliner tubes inscribed for the king together with a cartouche of each royal lady. The early years. Amenhotep reign falls essentially into 2 unequal parts. The first decade reflected a young and vigorous king promoting the sportsman image laid down by his predecessors and with some minor military activity. In year 5, there was an expedition to Nubia recorded on rock inscriptions near Aswan and at Canosso in Nubia. Although couched in the usual longitudinary manner, the event recorded seems to have been rather low-key. An updated still from Simna, now in the British Museum, also records a Nubian campaign, but whether it is the same one or a later one is uncertain. A rebellion at Ibhit is reported as having been heavily crushed by the viceroy of Nubia, king's son of Kush, Mermos. Although the king mighty bull strong in might, the fierce eye lion is noted as having made great slaughter within the space of a single hour. He was probably not present. Nevertheless, 150 Nubian men, 250 women, 175 children, 110 archers, and 55 servants, a total of 740 was said to have been captured, to which was added the 312 right hands of the slain. The opulent years. The last 25 years of Amenhotep's reign seem to have been a period of great building works and luxury at court in the arts. The longitary epithets that accompany the king's name are more grandiose metaphors than records of fact. He took the Horus name Great of Strength, who smites the Asiatics, when there is little evidence of such a campaign. Similarly, plunderer of Shinar and crusher of Nahrenin seem singularly inappropriate, particularly the latter, since one of his wives, Gillukhepli, was a princess of Nahrahin. The wealth of Kemet at the period came not from the spoils of conquest, as it had under Tuthmosis III, but from the international trade and an abundant of supply of gold from mines in the Wadi Hammamat, and from panning gold dust far south into the land of Kush. It was this great wealth and booming economy that led to such an outpouring of artistic talent in all aspects of the arts. Since the houses or palaces of the living were regarded as, we unfortunately have little evidence of the magnificence of a palace such as Amenhotep's Kata Palace. Fragments of the building, however, indicate that the walls were once plastered and painted with lively scenes from nature. Many of the temples he built have been destroyed too. At Karnak, he embellished the already large temple to Amun, and at Luxor he built a new one to the same god, of which the still standing Khonandad's court is a masterpiece of elegance and design. Particular credits is owed to his master architect Amenhotep, son of Hapu. On the west bank, his mortuary temple was destroyed in the next 19th dynasty, when it, like many of its predecessors, was used as a quarry. All that now remains of this temple are the two imposing statues of the king known as the Colossi of Memnon. This, in fact, a complete misnomer arising from the classical recognition of the statues as the Ethiopian prince Memnon, who fought at Troy. Of the two, the southern statue is the best preserved. Standing beside the king's legs, dwarfed by his statue, are the two important women in his life: his mother, Mutimwaye, and his wife, Queen Ti. A quarter of a mile behind the Colossus stands a great repaired still that was once in the sanctuary, and around are fragments of sculptures, the best of which, lying in a pit and found in recent years, is a crocodile-tailed sphinx. Okay, so in his later years, there was opulence, a lot of great artwork, a lot of trade with many other nations that brought in wealth, and wealth that came from the southern region into Kush. So there was great expenditures that was going on during this time. Okay, so the a peak of artistic achievement. So we're going to get into this, discussing the artistic achievements that happened here in Kemet at this time. Okay, some magnificent statuary dates from the reign of Amenhotep III, such as the two outstanding Calchet rose granite lines originally set before the temple at Salep in Nubia, but subsequently removed to the temple at Gebel Barkal further south in the Sudan. There is also proliferation of private statues, particularly of the architect Amenhotep's son of Hapu, but also of many other nobles and dignitaries. It is in the great series of royal portraits, however, that the sculpture's art is truly seen. Larger of them all, after the Colossus of the Menmun, is the huge limestone statue of the king and queen, with three small standing princesses from Medinet Habu. There are many other representations of the king, all of which project the contemplative, almost aspects of the king's features. Magnificently worked black granite seated statues of Amenhotep wearing the Nem's headdress have come from excavations behind the Colossus of Menun by Bel Sununi, and from Tennis in the delta. A number of statues of the king were reworked by later rulers, often by simply adding their cartouches or occasionally altering the features or aspects of the body, as with the huge red granite head, hitherto identified as being Tutmosis III from Karnak, also found by Belzuni and reworked by Ramses II, now in the British Museum. Several portraits in statues, reliefs, and wall paintings show the king wearing the helmet like caprice, the so-called blue or war crown. One of the most incredible finds of statuary in recent years was made in the courtyard of Amenhotep III colonnade of Luxor Temple in 1989. It included a superb 6 feet 1.83 meters high pink granite quartzite statue of the king standing on a ledge and wearing the double crown. The only damage the statue had sustained was under Akhenaten, when very carefully the hated name of Amun was removed from the cartouches where it appeared as part of the king's name. The inscriptions on the statue and its chronology suggest that it is a work from late in the reign. Despite the idolized youthful features of the king, it may possibly have been a cult statue. The two most widely known portraits of Queen T are the small ebony head in Berlin, which in the past caused many authorities to suggest that she came from south of Aswan, and the petite face and crowned head found by Petra at the temple of Si Rabit el Ka-Adam in Sinai, which is identified as the queen by her cartouche on the front of her crown. Other fine reliefs of her come from the tombs of south of the courtiers in her service, such as Yusahit and Kararuth. Death and burial. Inscribed clay dockets from the Malkata Palace carry dates into at least year 38 of Amenhotep's reign, implying that he may have died in his 39th regal year, when he would have been about 45 years old. His robbed tomb was rediscovered by the French expedition in 1799 in the Western Valley of the Kings. Amongst the debris, they found a large number of ushabtis of the king, some complete but mostly broken, made of black and red granite, alabasters, and cedar wood. Some were considerably larger than normal. Excavations and clearance by Howard Carter in 1915 revealed foundation deposits of Tutmosis the Fourth, showing that the tomb had been originally intended for that king. Despite this, the tomb was eventually used for Amenhotep III and also for Queen Tay, to judge from the fragments found of several different ushabtis of the queen. Queen T survived her husband by several years, possibly by as many as 12, since she is shown with her youngest daughter, Aten, in a relief in one of the Amarna tombs that is dated between years 9 and 12 of her son's reign. Aten is shown as a very young child and must have been born shortly before Amenhotep died, or even posthumously. We know from polite inquiries about Tay's health in the Amarna letters that she lived for a while at Akhenaten's modern Amarna, the new capital of her son Akhenaten. It has been suggested that there was a period of co-regency between the old king and his successor, but the argument is not proved either way. An interesting painting, sandstone, still found in a private household shrine at El Amarna, shows an elderly, rather obese Amenhotep III seated with Queen T. Whether he actually lived for a time in this city is a matter of conjecture. T certainly did, and may well have died there too, being taken back to Thieves for burial. Amenhotep III's mummy was probably one of those found by Loret in 1898 in the tomb of Amenhotep II. Although recently it has been suggested that this body was wrongly identified by the ancient priests when it was transferred to the new tomb. On biological grounds, Professors Ed Wint and John Harris have proposed it to be the body of Akhenaten, or possibly A previously identified female mummy, the elder woman, from the same catch, has been tentatively identified as Queen T, based on the examination of her hair and a lot of here in a small coffin from the tomb of Tutankhamun, inscriptionally identified as Thieves. Okay, so here we're going to go. We're going to talk about, in this one, remember, Dynasty XVIII was established in 1570 to 1293 BC, and this is part of the New Kingdom period. So this is the Age of Empire. This is the first dynasty of the Age of Empire, in Dynasty XVIII. So now, what we're going to do, I'm going to talk about the well-known pharaoh that most people know about. He was crowned as Amenhotep IV, but he is better known throughout history as Akhenaten, the founder of the first monolithic religion in world history. And then we're going to talk about Smenkhkare, who ruled after him. So Akhenaten, also known as Amenhotep IV, reigned between 1350 to 1334 BC. Now, Smenkhkare, who reigned after Akhenaten, reigned from 1336 to 1334 BC. So we're going to talk about these two pharaohs. I forgot to mention the reign of Tutmosis the Fourth. That was 1419 to 1386 BC, and Amenhotep III. That was he reigned between 1386 to 1349 BC. Okay, so we're going to get into this, and I know a lot of you know. Well, a lot of you do, and some of you don't. We're going to get into discussing about his reign. Okay, so we're going to get into that, and then we're going to discuss that. Now, I might take just a little 5-minute break. So if I decide to take a break, it's going to be let's say 5 minutes. So that gives you a chance to get up, go to the bathroom, take stretch a little, get something to eat. Now, within this break period, there's going to be a silence. It's not going to be dead. It's just going to be a little silence here. But let's get into reading about Akhenaten. Amenhotep IV, better known as Akhenaten, the new name he took early on in his reign. Ushered in a revolutionary period in Achaemenid history. The Amarna interlude, as it is often called, saw the removal of the seat of government to a short-lived new capital city, Akhenaten, modern El Amarna, the introduction of a new art style, and the elevation of the cult of the sun disk, the Aten, to preeminent status in Achaemenid religion. This last heresy is particular was to bring down on Othnan and his immediate successors, the Opabrim of later kings. The young prince was at least the second son of Amenhotep III by his chief wife T, and elder brother Prince Tuthmosis had died prematurely. Strangely, a whip bearing his name was found in Tutankhamun's tomb. There is some controversy over whether or not the old king took his son into partnership on the throne in a co-regency. There are quite strong arguments both for and against. A point in favor of a co-regency is the appearance during the latter years of Amenhotep III's reign of artistic styles that are subsequently seen as part of the revolutionary Amana art introduced by Akhenaten. On the other hand, both traditional and revolutionary art styles could easily have coexist during the early years of Akhenaten's reign. At any rate, if there had been a co-regency, it would not have been for longer than the short period before the new king assumed his preferred name of Akhenaten, servant of the Aten, in year 5. The beginning of Akhenaten's reign marked no great discontinuity with that of his predecessors. Not only was he crowned at Karnak, temple of the god Amun, but like his father, he married a lady of non-royal blood, Nefertiti, the daughter of the vizier Ah. Ah seems to have been a brother of Queen T. Anun was and son of Yuya and Tula. Nefertiti's mother is not known. She may have died in childbirth or shortly afterwards, since Nefertiti seems to have been brought up by another wife of Ah named Te, who would then be her stepmother. The cult of Artan. There can be little doubt that the new king was far more of a thinker and philosopher than his forebears. Amenhotep III had recognized the growing power of the priesthood of Amun and had sought to curb it. His son was to take the matter a lot further by introducing a new monolithic cult of sun worship that was incarnate in the sun disk, the Aten. Now, I have to disagree with this because I don't see this as a cult. I see this as a spiritual awakening from Akhenaten, because you got to remember that in certain periods of Kemet, you had the rise of the priesthood, and the priesthood would challenge the authorities of the pharaoh at times, and even at times they were wealthier than the pharaoh. So, excuse me, I had to get something to drink. So, in order for the pharaohs to curb the power of the priesthood, they did various things to do it. Either they did something what Othnan did, or they were kind of minimize their power by either putting someone in their family as head priest. So there was a time that the priesthood would challenge, but that's not going to be so much of a discussion in the New Kingdom period. Now, after the New Kingdom period, that's when the priesthood had risen up, but we'll get to that. Okay, this was not in itself a new idea, as a relatively minor aspect of the sun god Re Ha-Ra-Kate, the Aten, had been venerated in the Old Kingdom, and a large scarab of Akhenaten's grandfather, Tutmosis the Fourth, now in the British Museum, has a text that mentions the Aten. Rather, Akhenaten's innovation was to worship the Aten in its own right. Portrayed as a solar disk whose protective rays terminated in hands holding the Ankh hieroglyphics. For life, the Aten was accessible only to Akhenaten, thereby the need for an intermediate priesthood. At first, the king built a temple to his god Aten immediately outside the east gate of the temple of Amun at Karnak, but clearly the coexistence of the two cults could not last. He therefore prescribed the cult of Amun, closed the god's temples, took over the revenues, and to make a complete break in year 6, moved to a new capital in Middle Kemet, halfway between Memphis and Thieves. It was a virgin site not previously dedicated to any other gods or goddesses, and he named it Akhenaten, the horizon of the Aten. Today, the site is known as El Amana. In the tomb of the chief minister of Akhenaten, and later to become king after Tutankhamun's death, occurs the longest and best rendition of a composition known as the Hymn to the Aten, said to have been written by Akhenaten himself, quite moving in itself as a piece of poetry. Its similarity to and possible source of the concept in Psalms 104 has long been noted. It sums up the whole ethos of the Aten cult, and especially the concept that only Akhenaten had access to the god. Thou arises fair in the horizon of heaven, O living Aten, beginner of life. There is none who knows thee, save thy son Akhenaten. Thou hast made him wise in thy plans, and thy power. No longer did the dead call upon Osiris to guide them through the afterworld, for only through their adherence to the king and his intercession of their behalf could they hope to live beyond the grave. Wow, see, this is some powerful stuff that Akhenaten was doing, and they said that in the Christian Bible, Psalms 104 have something similar, so you know where they got this from. All right, so according to present evidence, however, it appears that it was only the upper echelon of society which embraced the new religion with any fervor, and perhaps that was only skin deep. Excavations at Amana have indicated that even here the old way of religion continued among the ordinary people. On a wider scale throughout Kemet, the new cult does not seem to have had much effect at a common level, except, of course, in dismantling the priesthood and closing the temples, but then ordinary populace had little to do with the religious establishment anyway, except on the high days and holidays when the god's statue would be carried in procession from the sanctuary outside the great temple walls. The standard bureaucracy continued its endeavor to run the country while the king courted his god. Cracks in the Kemetan Empire may have begun to appear in the later years of the reign of Amenhotep III. At any rate, they became more evident as Akhenaten increasingly left government and diplomats to their own devices. Civil and military authority came under two strong characters: who held the title Father of the God and was probably Akhenaten's father-in-law, and the general Horemheb, also Ah's son-in-law, since the married Ah's daughter Mutnachem, sister of Nefertiti. Both men were to become pharaoh before the 18th dynasty ended. This redoubtable pair of closely related high officials no doubt kept everything under control in a discreet manner while Akhenaten pursued his own philosophical and religious interests. New artistic style. It is evident from the art of the Amarna period that the court officially emulated the king's unusual physical characteristics. Thus, individuals such as the young princesses are endowed with elongated skulls and excessive atopsy, and while Beck, the chief sculptor and master of works, portrays himself in the likeness of his king with pentallous breasts and protruding stomach. On a still now in Berlin, Beck states that he was thought by His Majesty and that the court sculptors were instructed to represent what they saw. The result is a realism that breaks away from the rigid formality of earlier official descriptions, although naturalism is very evident in earlier unofficial art. The power behind the throne. Now we're going to get into this. The power behind the throne. Because, I don't say Akhenaten was crazy or religious zealous, but I guess he just went through his own philosophical understanding, and he kind of left the state at peril. So you had different people. Unfortunately, he had people who was able to maintain the state, and the state didn't collapse. But there have to, in situations like that, there has to be a power behind the throne under those type of circumstances. But let's see what happened here. Although the famous bust of Nefertiti in Berlin shows her with the elongated neck, the queen is not subject to quite the same extremes as others in Amenhotep, by virtue of being eloquently female. Now, before I go any further, now the bust of Nefertiti, that's from what I hear in Kemetic circles, not Egyptologist circles, that bust is false, and the real bust that they found was more of an indigenous. Now they had shown, I remember they had shown a picture of the bust of Nefertiti, and there was a picture of a woman. That woman looks just like the bust of Nefertiti. It is said that there was a European artist who was commissioned to create a bust of Nefertiti to make her look more European centric. So he took an image of his wife. Now this is what's being said. Further information, further research has to be done. So this bust that's in Germany now in the museum in Berlin is not the real image of Nefertiti. All right, so we'll get into that at a later date when we do further investigation on that to see where that leads to. Okay, indeed, there are several curious aspects of Nefertiti's representations. In the early years of Akhenaten's reign, for instance, Nefertiti was an unusually prominent figure in official art, dominating the scene carved on blocks of the temple to the Aten at Karnak. One such block shows her in the age-old warlike posture of pharaoh grasping captives by their hair and smiting them with a mace. Hardly the epithet of the peaceful queen and mother of 6 daughters, Nefertiti evidently played a far more prominent part in her husband's rule than was the norm. Tragedy seems to have struck the royal family in about year 12, with the death in childbirth of Nefertiti's second daughter, Smenkhkare. It is probably she who is shown in a relief in the royal tomb with her grief-stricken parents beside her sublime body and a nurse standing nearby holding a baby. The father of the infant was probably Othnan, since he is also known to have married 2 other daughters. Amenhotep, not to be confused with Smenkhkare, and Ankhesenpaten, later to become Tutankhamun's wife. Nefertiti appears to have died soon after year 12, although some suggested that she was disgraced because her name was replaced in several instances by that of her daughter Amenhotep, who succeeded her as great royal wife. The latter bore a daughter called Amenhotep Tasset. Amenhotep the Younger, also probably fathered by Othnan. Amenhotep was to become the wife of Smenkhkare, Akhenaten's brief successor. Nefertiti was buried in the royal tomb at Amana, judging by the evidence of a fragment of an alabas Ushabati figure bearing the cartouche found there in the early 1930s. All right, let's do. The king resting place. Othnan died 1334 BC, probably in his 6th regional year. Evidence found by Professor Geoffrey Martin during re-excavation of the royal tomb at Amana showed that blocking had been put in place in the burial chamber, suggesting that Akhenaten was buried there initially. Others do not believe that the tomb was used, however, in view of the heavily smashed fragments of his sarcophagus and canopic jars recovered from it, and also the scattered examples of his Ushabtis found not only in the area of the tomb, but also by Petra in the city. What is almost certain is that his body did not remain at Amarna. A burnt mummy seen outside the royal tomb in the 1880s and associated with jewelry from the tomb, including a small gold finger ring with Nefertiti cartouche, was probably Coptic, as was other jewelry nearby. Othman's Amenhotep would not have left his body to be despoiled by his enemies once his death, and the return to orthodoxy unleashed a backlash of destruction. They would have taken it to a place of safety, and where better to hide it than in the old royal burial ground at Thieves, where enemies would never dream of seeking it. Wow, I mean, they really get down and destroy these, these tombs here. Let's get into the next pharaoh, and then after we read the next pharaoh, we're going to take that brief 5-minute. Well, let's take a brief 3-minute after I read the next pharaoh that came after Akhenaten. Smenkhkare, Akhenaten's normal successor, was Smenkhkare, probably a younger brother of the king, but it appears that they may have died within months of each other. Smenkhkare's 2-year reign was in reality a co-regency during the last years of Akhenaten's life. A graffito in the tomb of Pare at Thieves records a third regnal year, and there are indications that Smenkhkare was preparing the ground for a return to the old orthodoxy and had left Akhenaten's. He was married to Nefertiti, the senior heiress of the royal bloodline, but she seems to have predeceased him. Her sister, Amenhotep thus became the senior survivor of the 6 daughters, having herself born a small daughter by Othnan named after her, and was married to the young Tutankhamun, the heir apparent, who was later to change his name to Tutankhamun. It was Tutankhaten, but he changed it to Tutankhamun. The mystery of Tomb 55 in the Valley of the Kings. A great deal of controversy surrounds the question of Smenkhkare mummy and burial. In January of 1907, Edward Ireton, working for Theodore Davis, discovered the badly watered, damaged contents of an unfinished tomb in the Valley of the Kings. Arguments have ranged ever since over the identity of the occupant of the Rish-type coffin, because the cartouche on it had all been hacked out. Initially, Davis believed he had found the tomb of Queen T, the damaged body being identified as female, and published it as such. Subsequently, the body changed sex and was identified as Othnan. The previously thought female characteristics of the skeleton being parallel with those of Othnan's portraits, especially the pelvic area. More detailed forensic examination, however, now suggests that the body belonged to Smenkhkare, and serological examination, blood grouping of tissue, as well as close skull measurements comparisons indicate that the occupant was a brother or possibly half-brother of Tutankhamun. The entrance to whose tomb, KV 62, is a mere 15 yards, 13.7 meters away across the valley floor. At one time, it appears that there were 3 bodies in the tomb. One of them was that of Queen T, and parts of her great gold overlaid wooden sarcophagus shrine were found there. Her body was probably taken from here around into the West Valley to join her husband Amenhotep III in KV 22. 4 alabaster canopic jars with finely carved female heads wearing the characteristic court wig of the period were found in the tomb. They show evidence of having been adapted by the addition of a royal urus to the brow, which was subsequently broken off. Unfortunately, they are unsubscribed but were presumably in suit with the coffin. It has been suggested that the canopic lids are portraits of Gaia, a Hirohito, obscure junior queen of Aten. The cartouches on the coffin had all been deliberately hacked out, literally to deny the occupants access to the next world, because loss of name was a terrible thing. The text still in place, however, had feminine endings to the appropriate words, indicating that the coffin had been made for a royal female. This was thought possibly to have been Meritaten Smenkhkare's wife, or now Kaya. The cartouches, it was suggested, had been hacked out because the perpetrators believed that the occupant was the hated Akhenaten. Could have been the third body in the tomb at the time. It seems that the hope to remove the bodies of Queen T and Smenkhkare from the contamination of association with the heretic king Akhenaten, but made a mistake and removed Akhenat's body instead. On that basis, somewhere in a small undiscovered tomb or cache in or near the Valley of the Kings, Akhenat's body may still lie undisturbed. It will be accompanied by water of Smenkhkare. Funerary equipment was removed from Tomb 55, and that should include Ashapti's figures of Smenkhkare, because although examples are known for the rest of the royal family, not even a fragment of one survives bearing his name. Okay, so we're going to get into Tutankhamun. So let's take a 3-minute break here. So this is a great time for you to go and use the bathroom, go and take a stretch or get something to eat or drink. So remember, we're going to take a 3-minute break. It is 6:04. Well, actually 6:05 p.m. Central Time here. So 6:08 p.m. Let's return. Now, for those of you in the East Coast, that would be 7:08 p.m. Those of you Mountain Time, 5:08 p.m. Those of you in Pacific Time, 4:08 p.m. So let's take this break now, and we will return. And when we return, we will talk about Tutankhamun's reign. Okay, we are back live. I hope you enjoyed your break. Thank you for being patient and tuning in. So, what we're going to do, we're going to talk about Tutankhamun's reign. He reigned between 1334 to 1325 BC. Now, his reign was a short reign. He was a teenager when he came to the throne. So there was not so much, there wasn't too much with him in his reign. He didn't do too much really to really go into. But there's some things that we can go into. It's mostly going to be talking about his little bit that he had done. So let me just take a quick drink and then we can go into that. Okay, let's get into it. Tutankhamun, before the spectacular discovery of his almost intact tomb in the Valley of the Kings, KV 62. In November of 1922, Tutankhamun was a shadowy and little-known figure of the late 18th dynasty. To a certain extent, he still is, despite the prominence he has acquired from the contents of his tomb. Tutankhamun's name was known in the early years of this century from a few references, but his exact place in the sequence of the Amana kings was uncertain. Like Akhenaten and his name had been omitted from the classic king list of Obolate and Karnak, which simply jumped from Amenhotep III to Horemheb. Indeed, Tutankhamen's exact identity and his parentage is still a matter of some conjecture, although it is clear that the young prince was brought up at Amana, probably in the North Palace. A number of items found in his tomb are relics of his life at the Aten court, notably the Aten's disk shown protecting him and his young wife, Akhenaten. On the pictorial back panel of his gold inlaid throne. Towards the end of Akhenat's reign, the senior members of the court, especially and Horemheb, probably realized that things could not go on as they were. Smenkhkare, Akhenaten's brother or son and co-regent, must have come to the same conclusion, since he had left Akhenaten and moved back to the old secular capital, Memphis, where he may have been in contact with the proscribed members of the priesthood of Amun before his death and burial at Thieves. Soon after Akhenaten's death, Tutankhamun, as he then was crowned at Memphis. Aged about 9 when he succeeded, the young king would have had no close female relatives left. His probable mother Kaya, his stepmother Nefertiti, and his elder stepsisters all being dead. He was probably under the direct care and influence of the senior civil servant, and Horemheb, the military man. Tutankhamen's wife, Ankhesepaten, was evidently older than he, since she was already of childbearing age, seemingly having had a daughter by her father Akhenaten. As soon as the new king had been installed, a move was made back to the old religion. This was signified radically in year 2 when both king and queen changed the 10 ending of their names to Amun. Tutankhamun probably had little to do with this, or indeed many other decisions. His advisors were the ones who held the reins and manipulated the puppet strings of the boy king. A great restoration still records the reinstallation of the old religion of Amun and the rebuilding of the temples. The still is known from 2 copies, both of which were later usurped by Horemheb, as were many other monuments of Tutankhamun. A large number of reliefs and statues have been identified as originally belonging to Tutankhamun, the majority showing him either in the company of Amun or as the god himself. Although the inscriptions have been changed, the king's boyish features are clearly recognizable. Extensive building works were carried out at Karnak and Luxor in Tutankhamun's name, especially the great colonnade and the relief scenes of festivals of Oblate at Luxor, but all were subsequently taken over by Horemheb. Apart the pivotal return to Thieves and the Cult of Artan, few events from Tutankhamun's reign have been documented. Military campaigns were apparently mounted in Nubia and Palestine, Syria, suggested by a brightly painted Gesco box from Tutankhamun's tomb, which has 4 spirited scenes featuring the king. One shows him hunting lions in the desert, another gazelles whist on the third, and fourth he furiously attacks Nubians and then Syrians, who fall to his arrows. Finally, carved scenes of prisoners in the Memphite tomb of the military commander-in-chief. Horemheb led some veracity to the scenes on the Grisel box, as does the painting in the tomb of Hugh, Viceroy of Nubia, which shows subservient Nubian princes and piles of tributes. It is doubtful, however, that Tutankhamun actually took part in any of the campaigns. Tutankhamun's retinue. In addition to the 2 premier figures of and Horemheb, the names of other high officials who served during Tutankhamun's reign are known to us. 2 of them were accorded the privilege of donating objects to the king's burial. One was Nuqman, military officer under Horemheb, and a relative of possibly a son. He presented 5 large wooden ushaptits, each inscribed with his name under the feet. There is a fine portrait head of Nuktam in Cairo, broken from a dialect statue with his beautiful but unnamed wife. Another official was Maya, who was Tutankhamun's treasurer and other overseer of the place of eternity, the royal cemetery, where his name is also known from a graffito in a fine hand on a wall in the tomb of Tutmosis the Fourth, recording restoration being carried out, presumably the checking and rewrapping of the royal mummy. Tutankhamun's tomb, Maya contributed a fine large wooden ushaptit, again with his name recorded under his feet, and a beautifully carved effigy of the mummified king on a lion-headed bear, with 2 delightful Ka and Ba birds watching over him. Maya's tomb was located at Smenkhkare in 1843 by Richard Leptus. When the splendid statues of him and his wife Mariette were removed to Leiden in 1986, the tomb was rediscovered by Professor Jeffrey Martin through a robber's tunnel from a nearby tomb. Although high officials to have a tomb at Thieves was U, Viceroy of Nubia, and vast wall paintings about 17 feet, 6 meters long, shows U in the full finery of his office, presenting the princes of North and South Nubia together with their families and retainers to the king, not least amongst the representation in the encourage of a Nubian princess, she in her chariot, and the vast piles of tribute. This may all be the result of Horemheb military foray into Nubia. Death of the king. Tutankhamun died young, probably during the ninth regnal year. Evidence for this is twofold. First, forensics and analysis of his mummy has put his age at death at about 17. Secondly, clay seals on wine jars found in his tomb record not only the type of wine, the vineyard, and the name of the chief vineyard, but also the king's regional year when each wine was laid down. The highest recorded date is year 9, suggesting that Tutankhamun died in that year. There is no positive evidence on Tutankhamun's mummy as to how he met his death. He certainly did not die of consumption as was once thought. However, autopsies and x-rays have located a small silver of bone within the upper cranial cavity. It may have arrived there as the result of an blow, but whether deliberately struck to indicate murder or the result of an accident such as a fall from a chariot, it is not possible to say. I heard about this, that his death could have been a murder similar to what happened. Well, not similar, but same circumstances as Ramses III. But a little different. He wasn't murdered in the harem. So we don't know what was the real cause of death, but we know that there was a blow in his head. So something, some type of trauma was there, and someone or something caused it. I hope they get to the bottom of it. The discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb, several finds made in the Valley of the Kings over the years led Howard Carter to believe that the king was still somewhere in the valley. A small fifth cup bearing Tutankhamun's name, 1905 to 1906 season, the remnants of materials used in the king's embalming and of a funerary feast or wake, 1907, followed 2 years later in 1909 by a cache of gold fragments from chariots and furniture fitting with the king's name and that of as a commoner. The story of Carter's quest and his understanding patron, the 5th Earl of Carnarvon, is well known. After many years of frustrating and meticulous working through the valley, clearing down to bedrock, the first of a flight of 16 descending steps was found on 4th of November 1922, just in front and to the north side of the entrance to the tomb of Ramses VI. By the next day, the stairs had been cleared, revealing the top of a blocked door sealed with the impression of the necropolis guards. The recumbent jackal over 9 captives. Behind it was a sloping corridor filled with debris, and at the far end another blocked doorway. Beyond it, and at right angles, was a large chamber dubbed the Antech chamber, and of it to the back left was a smaller room, the annex. To the right was a blocked doorway in the end wall, guarded by 2 larger than life-size black wood statues of the king. Beyond that was the burial chamber, almost completely filled with the huge calypso of gold overlaid wooden shrines enclosing the red quartz sarcophagus with its cracked granite. Of the nest of 3 coffins in the sarcophagus, the innermost was of solid gold, the outer 2 of wood overlaid with gold. The king's mummy lay in the midst of all this splendor with its famous gold mask, but by comparison the actual remains of the king himself were pitiful, the result of poor embalming. Beyond the painting burial chamber, the only decorated room in the tomb, through the open doorway, guarded by a large recumbent wooden figure of the jackal Anubis, lay the treasury. Here stood the great canopic wooden shrine enclosing the calcite canopic chest. The chest held 4 jars containing Tutankhamun's viscera, whose human head lid were modeled in the likeness of the king. Okay. Hopes were high that amongst all these splendor there would be some important literary or historical documentation, but nothing of that nature was found. Apart from the king's own remains, the most moving aspect of the tomb must surely be the 2 stillborn mummified fetuses of baby girls, aborted at 5 months and possibly 8 or 9 months, found in the treasury. They must have been daughters of Tutankhamun by Amenhotep. Had either lived, she would have taken her mother's place in due course as the great royal heiress, carrying on the Amana bloodline. Indeed, the whole later history of Kemet, 19th century, would have been changed. The king burial. The immediate availability of the gold coffin and mask, as well as the large granite sarcophagus box, suggests the provisions for Tutankhamun's eventually burial had been in hand for some time. However, his actual death was obviously unexpected, for not only were a number of the items provided for the burial from stock and originally intended for previous use, but even the tomb he was laid to rest in was not intended for him. Signs of haste are evident wherever, since the ritual required that all preparations and the embalming be completed within a period of 70 days. The tomb is far too small for a royal burial and had almost certainly been granted a royal favor to the elderly in recognition of his signal service over the years. There are other instances of high officials being granted a similar privilege. Okay. There are other instances of high officials being granted similar privileges of burial in the Valley of the Kings because the king's sudden demise and the fact that this tomb was virtually ready. It was appropriated and steps immediately taken to decorate the burial chamber. Tutankhamun's intended tomb seems to be that found by Giovanni Belsolani in 1816 at the far end of the Western Valley of the Kings, KV 23, and later used by This conforms to the pattern of 18th Dynasty royal tombs and was probably chosen with a propaganda motive in view, that is to buy propaganda motive to view, that is to bury the king fairly close to his grandfather Amenhotep III, thereby underlying the return to the old ways and the old religion. Amongst Tutankhamun's equipment, there were a number of items that had obviously come from a funerary store. At least one of the great wooden shrines had been made for Smenkhkare, as had the 4 small gold coffinites that had held the king's vessel. It can be seen sometimes with difficulty where the earlier name had been excised and Tutankhamun's added over the top. It is also possible that the second middle Okay, exercise. Tutankhamun added over the top. It is also possible that the second middle coffin of the 3 had also been intended for Smenkhkare, since its features are unlike the others 2, and the miniature canopic coffinites are copies of it. Even the sarcophagus box was second-hand. Extensive recutting was undertaken to the extent of removing all the original facts. Even the let's get onto this. Even a sarcophagus, I'm going to read it again. Even a sarcophagus box was second-hand. Extensive recutting was undertaken to the extent of removing all the original text, thus lower and lower the surface. Okay. Lower surface, adding new ones. Wings were also added to the altar. Standing figures of the goddess, possibly because of they were originally standing queens, as on Akhenaten's shattered sarcophagus. The granite lid was made to fit the quartzite box. Obviously a different material, but again, time may have been of the essence, and a suitable lap of granite was unavailable at Thieves. In the event there was an accident and the lid was split in two. The succession in question. Okay, remember, Tutankhamun didn't have heirs, so we're going to go into the last two pharaohs of this dynasty and see how do they ascend to the throne. Tutankhamun's early death left his wife Amenhotep, a young widow, in a very difficult situation. Obviously, hemmed in on all sides by ambitious men much older than herself, she took an unprecedented step and wrote to Tuthmosis I, king of the Hittites, explaining her plight. Oh, you don't never do that. During that time, you don't do stuff like that, because your enemies of these various empires would see that as a sign of weakness. But let's go into that and see what happened. The evidence come not from the commitment records, but from excavations at Tuthmosis in Turkey, the Hittites' capital, where a copy was found in the archives. She told him her husband had died and she had no sons, while he had many, so would he send one to marry her and continue the royal line. The Hittite king was highly suspicious and made inquiries. Messengers were sent to check the details and reported back that such was the case. A Hittite prince, Smenkhkare, was therefore sent to Kemet to take up the queen's offer. It seems that he got no further than the border before he was murdered, and the deed can easily be laid at the door of Horemheb. He had the means, as commander-in-chief of the army, the opportunity, and certainly the motive. Okay, now we're going to get into the two last pharaohs of the 18th dynasty. Once again, I thank you for tuning in. This one was a long one, because this one was going to be a long one, because Dynasty 18 had 14 pharaohs, and there was a lot of information with this, so it had to be divided into two. But we're close to the end, and we're going to go into this, and hopefully a lot of you were able to understand about this dynasty, and then we would move forward from there. Okay, so let's go on to this. He reigned in 1325 to 1321 BC, and Horemheb reigned from 1321 to 1293 BC. Both of them didn't reign for too long. Now an old man, apparently became king by marrying Tutankhamun's widow Amenhotep, possibly against her wishes, since she was actually marrying her grandfather. Evidence for the marriage came from the bezel of a ring seen by Professor Percy Newberry. In Cairo in the 1920s, which carried the cartouches of Amenhotep and side by side, a normal way of indicating a marriage. The wedding must have taken place rapidly because officiated at Tutankhamun's funeral as a king wearing the blue crown. Furthermore, by burying his predecessor, he also consolidated his claim to the throne. In view of his age, it is small wonder that Ah's reign was brief, a mere 4 years. There were few monuments that can be identified as his, partially, no doubt, because many of them were usurped by Horemheb. At any rate, work continued on Tomb 23 in the Western Valley, probably originally intended for Tutankhamun, and the walls were extensively painted. It is to be noted that the lady accompanying in the paintings is not Amenhotep, but his older wife T. A large stone sarcophagus was provided for which, like Tutankhamun's, had goddesses enfolding the corners with their wings. The tomb was found by Bellinzoni in 1816. The sarcophagus in fragments, its complete and dome lead, was only discovered in the burial chamber debris in 1972. Ah's mummy has not been identified, although Professors Wint and Harris suggested in 1990 that the mummy from the 1881 cache, Hieroglyph, identified as Amenhotep III, might be that of Ah. In fact, it is highly unlikely that Ah's mummy survives in view of the destruction wreaked in his tomb. Not only was the sarcophagus smashed, but his figure was hacked out and his name excised in the wall painting and text. No Yushati figures are known to exist for him either. This damnatio memoriae seems to have been carried out on the instructions of Ah's successor Horemheb, which raises the curious question as to why he did not order Tutankhamun's tomb to be similarly attacked and robbed. After all, he could not have forgotten its location in less than a decade, particularly since he was so involved with the burial. In his mortuary temple at Thieves near Minaret Habu, inscribed his name on two quartzite colossus of Tutankhamun taken from the latter's temple nearby, possibly buried below that of Even these statues were usurped by Horemheb when he took over Ah's temple. It would appear that Amenhotep did not survive and there is no later record of her after the ring bezel mentioned above. With her dead, the last of the true Amana royal bloodline. Okay, now we're going to go into the pharaoh Horemheb and discuss what happened here. Horemheb's background is virtually unknown, except that he came from Heracropolis near the entrance to the Fayum, and was obviously a career officer whose capabilities were early recognized. First serving under Amenhotep III, he became great commander of the army under Akhenaten and was later appointed king's deputy by Tutankhamun. He was obviously a highly ambitious man, and the death of offered the perfect opportunity to restore to Kemet the strong leadership he felt she needed. Horemheb therefore declared himself king in 1321, consolidating his claim to the throne through his marriage to a lady named Amenhotep III, the sister of Nefertiti. He thus formed a link back to the female royal bloodline, albeit a tenuous one. From evidence in his recently discovered tomb at Smenkhkare, he appears to have had an earlier wife, but her name is not known. Horemheb must have been a middle-aged when he became king, and he immediately set about restoring status quo, reopening the temples, repairing them where necessary, and bringing back the priesthood of Amun. Here he did make a change, however, realizing the stranglehold they had endeavored to put on Amenhotep III. He reappointed priests from the army whose loyalties he could rely on to consolidate his hold over the army. Now that he was really no longer primarily a military man, he divided it under two separate commanders, one for the north and one for the south. Horemheb usurped the monuments of his immediate predecessor, and Tutankhamun, to the two great restoration stills that detail the good works of Tutankhamun. He simply added his own name. Embellishments were carried out at the great temple of Amun at Karnak, where he initiated the great Hepatastyle hall and added a tall pylon, number 9. Here he achieved two objects. First, he built the pylon to the glory of Amun on the south side of Karnak, and secondly, he destroyed the hated temple to the Aten erected by Akhenaten by simply dismantling it and using its small talatet, two hands with blocks, as interior filling for the hollow pylon. Archaeologists have recovered thousands of these blocks during the restoration of the pylon and have been able to reconstruct great amount of scenes. In one sense, therefore, Horemheb's destructive scheme backfired. By hiding the blocks in the pylon, he preserved them for posterity. Horemheb took over Oz mortuary temple on the west bank at Minaret Habu, together with the two colossal quartzite statues of Tutankhamun that had himself usurped. Thus he set about completely expunging from the record any trace of his four Amana predecessors. He dated his reign from the death of Amenhotep III, adding the intervening years to his own total. None of the Amana names appeared in any of the Ramessides king lists at Abydos and Karnak. Furthermore, in the early 19th dynasty tomb of a certain Amenhotep at Thieves, where two rows of seated statues of kings and queens are depicted on the west wall, Horemheb is placed between Amenhotep III and Ramses I. Kings of the 19th dynasty were to regard him as the founder of their line, and this probably explains why a number of tombs of officials, as well as that of Ramses II's sister, the Princess Tia, were deliberately placed near his Smenkhkare tomb. Although official records of Horemheb's reign go as high as year 59, incorporating those of the Amana pharaohs, his actual reign of almost 30 years was spent in consolidation. There is little evidence of external contact except for a campaign in Kush, possibly simply a royal progress or inspection, and a trading expedition to the south. So basically, this last pharaoh of the 18th dynasty, one, he wasn't a member of that family. Two, he usurped their images, their sarcophagus, to make him seem as though he was great. He was a fraud. That's what he was. But this happened in various periods. Like, some pharaohs would usurp the old pharaohs of the old dynasties to make themselves look as though they done a lot and they really didn't do too much. The two tombs of Horemheb began his funerary preparations long before he had any inkling that he would become pharaoh, meaning that he already had a private tomb at Smenkhkare when, as king, he started to build himself a large tomb in the Valley of the Kings. The tomb at Smenkhkare, like that of Maya, Tutankhamun's treasure, had been partially discovered in the early 19th century AD, when sculptures and reliefs were removed from both to European collections, principally to Leiden, but it was lost again until the excavations of Kemet Exploration Society in 1975. Excavations at the Smenkhkare tomb revealed that the walls were superbly carved with scenes of Horemheb's military and court career. From these, we learned that there were at least two small campaigns during Tutankhamun's reign against Libyans and Syrians. The faces of the prisoners are especially well represented in the carvings. The tomb was badly wrecked in integrity, but enough remained of shattered funerary furniture and reliefs and a superb open work gold earring that the robbers must have dropped to testify that Horemheb's tomb was one of the finest in the area. He himself was not buried in the Smenkhkare tomb because of his elevation, although it appears that his two wives may have been. After Horemheb became pharaoh, he sent workmen to add the royal uterus to his brow in the sculpted reliefs, even though he himself was not going to make use of the tomb. Horemheb tomb in the Valley of the Kings, KV 57, was found by Theodore Davis in 1908, as with all the tombs in the Royal Valley. It was unfinished and had been robbed. Davis found large quantities of scattered furniture and wooden figures of the king, examples of which some 14 years later were to be found complete in Tutankhamun's tomb, such as the king standing on the back of a striding panther, although known from the wall paintings in the later 20th Dynasty tomb of Seti II, KV 15. The painting of several rooms in the tomb had been finished to a very high standard. Work in other rooms, however, was still in progress when the king died, and these are particularly interesting because they show the manner of working, the outline, girds, and the corrections made. In the burial hall, Davis found Horemheb's great red granite sarcophagus. Horemheb's mummy was not discovered, although the remains of 4 individuals were scattered in the burial hall and a side chamber. These were probably members of the Horemheb's family, although it has been suggested that Ah's body may have been brought here from his tomb in the Western Valley after it had been robbed. It is possible that a graffito found in the tomb refers to Horemheb's body being moved to the tomb of Turoret and Smenkhkare in KV14 for restoration, but other than that, there is no trace of it. It does not appear to be one of the unidentified bodies from the 2 mummy caches. Okay, so that is the end of the 18th dynasty and the last pharaoh of the 18th dynasty. What is your opinion on the last pharaoh of the 18th dynasty? Me, he sounds like a fraud, but we're not going to go into that. But next, this Thursday, March 17th, at 2 p.m. Central Time and 3 p.m. Eastern Time and 1 p.m. Mountain Time and 12 p.m. Pacific Time, we're going to conduct episode 20, and we're going to talk about Ramses the First and Seti the Fifth. We're going to talk about the 19th dynasty. We're going to go into the 19th dynasty. In the 19th dynasty, you have 4 pharaohs. So we're going to talk about the first 4 pharaohs of the 19th dynasty. And these 4 pharaohs are Ramses the First, Seti the First. Hold on for a moment. Let me just get this for you. Yes. So as I mentioned, we're going to talk about Ramses the First, Seti the First. Hold on. I'm gonna get you the information here. Okay, sorry about that. We're going to talk about Ramses the First, Seti the First, Ramses the Second, and Amenhotep. So we're going to talk about those 4 pharaohs, and then we're going to do part 2, which would be on a Monday, and we will discuss that. So remember, this Thursday we're going to discuss Dynasty XIX. And this is still part of the New Kingdom, the Empire Age, and they had great pharaohs in the 19th dynasty as you had in the 18th dynasty. The 19th dynasty began in 1293 to 1185 BC. So once again, thank you for tuning in to today's show, The Royal House of Ra. I am your host, Amenhotep Khufu El Ra. I look forward in talking and speaking with all of you this Thursday, March 17th. And thank you for tuning in, and take care.